And there's the field versus turf discussion, which we could have later on. And then there's also this one about how certain teams looked week one and whether or not it was rust from not participating in the preseason. And so then the question becomes, all right, who should play in the preseason? Should more guys get some more reps? To me, it feels like this is depends on the player, maybe depends on the team, and maybe it's up to the coaches to identify that. But you can't deny that some teams looked absolutely awful week one.
It looks sloppy. I mean, the operations, ball security, it looked sloppy. It looked out of sync. And I know weather played a factor in some. There's a bunch of games with potential weather or weather that did impact the game, Cleveland, Cincinnati in particular. But I think there's, Nick Sirianni came out and said it, as we talked about the Thursday night game tonight. He even though the Eagles got a win, he thought they came out and they didn't look as, clean in their operations and how they played, and he's got to rethink that. And look, they have, two new coordinators. I would have thought you would have saw more play from them in the preseason for that reason alone. But I think you're going to have to revisit it for a number of reasons. I don't think it's just how the style of play went. There's some thought that as we look at the Aaron Rodgers injury, and everyone wants to blame it on the turf, which I'll be honest with you, if he's not getting hit by Leonard Floyd, that injury's not happening. So to me, that's not a turf injury. Now you might say, well, if it was grass, maybe his foot would have. I don't know. The guy landed on top of him.
Landed on top of him.
So it doesn't matter if it was grass or turf. That injury is probably taking place. What I do know is this. Guys are expected, after not really ramping up to the intensity that a regular season game, really calls for, are going from a practice to that, and it's really different. Like the one thing I can say from my rookie year to being able to play through all of it, like there are different speeds and intensities to it. Preseason is a higher, like playing in a preseason game is much more intense than in practice. It just is. There's cutthroat guys out there flying around trying to just, make a roster at that point. And it's a much greater intensity. So it prepares your body for that. If you're a quarterback, you're getting hit. You don't have a red jersey on. Regular season amps up from there. Postseason amps up from there. Like that's just the intensity and speed of all of it. And so when you're basically taking a jump from practice and you're kind of, I guess you'd say transitioning from one of those gears, from first to third, first to fourth, it's a little different. Like on your body, it takes a little more to get going, right? The RPMs take a little slower to ramp them up. And I think that plays a role in a lot of soft tissue injuries as well. And so even from an injury standpoint, it might sound crazy because people are like, what are you talking about? If you're playing in a preseason game, you have a chance of getting hurt. Yeah, you do. But if you're practicing football, you have a chance of getting hurt. Like we've seen guys who went down and practice this training camp, not even a game. It's football. You always run that risk. I mean, you tell me what would be a better situation. Aaron Rodgers playing, 4 play. I mean, he might be the one or one of few who are excluded from it because you've paid him and they mean so much to your team where you don't want to subject them to it. But a lot of other guys should probably be playing just to get their bodies ready for what's going to be a long 17-game season. I think there's a lot of data, too, that backs that up in regards to, sports performance and training, too, for a lot of teams that played some of their starters early on.
I think you got to look at the way they practice as well, the schedule of how physical, how the lack of physicality, in practices has changed dramatically and drastically also. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, we're not going to play our starters at the risk of them getting injured in an insignificant game. We have framed preseason as a time for guys to fight for their jobs, and that's basically what preseason is for. I always thought preseason was guys playing themselves back into shape. That's what I thought it was for. First game, you get out there, you take one or two series in the first preseason game as starters so that you can feel like you're about to die and pass out from a drive taking place, whether you're on offense or on defense. You get maybe one more drive in there, and then you get out of there. Second game, You do maybe one series or two series. You get out of there. Third game, you play that third preseason game like it's a real game. And then maybe you get out in the fourth quarter. But you take your reps in the third game as if it is a real – even the preparation for the game is more of a game type of approach. And then the fourth, the last preseason game was really generally for those guys. Like basically when the starters weren't playing to get in game condition, that was when you're looking at who you're going to hire, who's going to make the roster, and so on and so forth. Get your film for as a audition for other teams, whatever it may be. It's not that anymore. And I've been saying that for a while now. I know we've had this debate since we've started doing the show as well, is to play the starter or not to play the starter. That is the question. Like, we've had this debate before.
Was it Shakespeare?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I just figured, and lieu of everything that Aaron Rodgers has
Can you say it more of like a play, like a thespian voice?
Sure. As we have this conversation about what should take place or not take place within the parameters of the National Football League, the question that continues to present itself to thee is, well, do you play the starters or do you not play the starters? To play or not to play? That is the question.
Round of applause, please.
There you go.
Round of applause, please. That was fantastic.
No worries, man.
Well done. Take a bow. Take a bow.
Thank you. But that is, to me, I feel like that may have gotten lost in all of this, is that, as you mentioned, Q, you cannot recreate game reps anywhere else but in a game. And I said this, I made mention of this as it applied to college as well. Seeing these early games of big matchups take place between teams, you're not necessarily – you're benefiting from the entertainment aspect of it. You're not benefiting from getting the best from each team against one another this early in the season.
Have you guys been around people, not just in football, but in any professional environment, that think that they're too good for the prep or the practice that goes into being good? That, I don't need that. I can – to me, that this is, this is where you take inventory on what it is, like what you really are. Because I've always felt more comfortable. Look, I could probably do a show without prepping. I don't want to do a show without prepping. To me, I want to be able to feel like I've done the work to get me prepared to perform at a better level or at a higher level. And I just wonder if there's maybe some players or coaches who aren't recognizing players that do need those reps, because they're not good enough just to go out there with no practice. Like Nick Bosa, different story. That guy went out there, wasn't in camp the entire time, and they were never worried about it. But Nick Bosa's a rarity. Maybe there's more guys who need to be accountable for what they need to get ready for games.
I can promise you this. Nick Bosa was working out while he wasn't in camp. True. He was training while he wasn't in camp. Like, that dude doesn't look like that, doesn't play like that, hasn't accomplished as much as he has if he's not preparing himself. I've never seen anyone be able to excel without, going through a process and having some sort of preparation. Right? Now, they might be uber talented. We're not working as hard as others. That's true in some cases. But I've personally never dealt with a player who didn't have some sort of process, some sort of way he went about preparing to go play. And whether that was practice, working out, the running, whatever it was. And usually the best that I'd ever been around, they were always some of the hardest workers. They were always some of the most focused, most detailed in what they were doing and what they wanted to accomplish.
I'll just say there have been guys that just aren't practice guys. They're just not practice guys. I was just telling my son, I was having this conversation with my son the other day. You can sit there and be like, "What up, Dad, son? He doesn't do as well as me in practice. He doesn't, this guy, da-da-da, this and that." And I say, football culture, you got to understand, there's sometimes there's practice squad All-Americans, all pros, and they go into the game and they disappear. You don't see what you see in practice. Then sometimes you have guys that aren't practice guys at all, and they look like they shouldn't even be on the team, and then the lights come up and their game goes up, all the way up. And it is unexplainable, the phenomenon of a guy that just isn't in the practicing and can go turn it on in the game, or a guy that practices like the best football player in the world, but it doesn't translate to the game. It's just a weird thing. But as far as preparation is concerned, you can't cheat being in game condition for a game. You can't cheat it. So regardless of whatever your process may be or how you get there, in order for you to be at the level where you can compete and be effective and actually earn your way onto the field, you have to have some semblance of being prepared to play, because you have to earn the trust of those coaches to put your ass on the field to begin with. And if you go out there and you're dead after one play and you got to come out and you're tapping your head, that act will run short. It'll run dry very quickly. So if you're a guy that doesn't like to practice, you're still a guy that's probably doing everything that it takes to make sure you're staying in the type of condition where when you get your opportunity and you get out there, you're doing what it is that needs to be done. That's just the law of it, you know? That's just the law of it. And once you've proven that, then you get the benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, this player here, like, you know, that like the reports that were coming out that Devontae Adams doesn't like to practice. Okay, well, I've seen enough of Devontae Adams in the game where I'd say, okay, right? But now you see somebody like Kyler Murray, like, Kyler Murray doesn't like to practice. Kyler Murray isn't out there. And what are you going to say? You might, I don't know. Like, I might question it. Like, he might need that work. He might need to see it. Zach Wilson, he doesn't practice. Like, well, he needs that work. He needs to see it. I think the same thing about pretty much most of the league. These guys need to get out and see it from real game reps. I just don't – this whole new way of doing the preseason and never playing any of your starters the entire preseason, I'm not attributing that to Aaron Rodgers' injury. I will say I will attribute some of these injuries to them their bodies not being game ready, game rep ready, and getting into a game. I will attribute some of the sloppy play and the mistakes that are made to not being game ready, game rep ready. I will attribute it to that because you got to do it in order to improve at it. If you're not doing it, then at some point you have to go through the acclimation process of what it feels like to play game reps for 4 quarters. For those out here who have never played game reps at a high level for 4 quarters, that is hard. It's hard. Yeah. It's not easy. So that's something to take into consideration that, yeah, you might have to reconsider how preseason is being approached.